Ladies, after 40 years, I couldn't take it anymore. That stiff, cold feeling every morning. I'm talking about waking up next to Richard, knowing he was texting his 28-year-old secretary at midnight. Yeah, my 65-year-old husband was having a midlife crisis with a girl younger than our daughter. But honey, wait until you hear what I did next. Let's just say 60 is the new 40, and I can prove it. My name is Linda Thompson, and I never thought I'd be starting over at 60. For 4 decades, I was Richard Thompson's loyal wife. The woman who packed his lunches, ironed his shirts, and raised his children while he climbed the corporate ladder at Coca-Cola. I was the perfect corporate wife, always smiling at company dinners, never complaining about the late nights, the business trips, or the missed anniversaries. I built my entire identity around being Mrs. Richard Thompson, and I was proud of it. Every morning for years, I'd wake up before him to put on a little makeup so he'd never see me looking too tired. I'd have his coffee ready, his newspaper folded just the way he liked it. I knew his schedule better than he did. I remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot, sent gifts to his clients at Christmas, and kept track of all his medications when he hit his 60s. That's what partnership meant to me. Being there, supporting him, making his life easier so he could focus on providing for our family. When our kids were young, I'd stay up late helping with science projects and baking for school functions, then get up at dawn to make breakfast before Richard headed to the office. During those years, I put my nursing career on hold. Just temporarily, he'd said. But temporary turned into permanent as Richard's job demanded more travel and someone needed to raise our children. "You're so good with the kids," he would tell me. "They need you at home." And I believed him because I wanted to be a good mother, a good wife. I still remember how handsome Richard looked on our wedding day back in 1984. He was 25, I was 20, and we were so young, so hopeful. He had those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right into my soul, thick, dark hair, and a smile that made my heart skip. When he promised to love me forever, I believed him with every fiber of my being. We had dreams, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 3 kids, family vacations to the beach. And we achieved all of that, but somewhere along the way, something changed. The first signs were subtle. He started working later, checking his phone constantly, smiling at text messages. I told myself it was work, an important project, a demanding client. When he bought a new cologne, started going to the gym 3 times a week, and suddenly cared about his carb intake, I convinced myself it was a health kick, a normal response to turning 65. Men get insecure about aging too, my friend Carol had said during our weekly coffee date. It's probably just a phase. But phases don't usually wear size 2 dresses and call your husband Richie when his name is Richard. Phases don't leave lipstick on his collar or send him lingerie receipts to his family email that his wife still manages. Phases don't make him password protect his phone after 40 years of marriage. I can still feel the exact moment when denial was no longer possible. It was a Tuesday evening in January. I was making Richard's favorite pot roast, the one that takes hours to cook just right. He texted that he'd be home late, another client dinner. I'd heard that excuse 3 times that week alone. Something inside me just snapped. Maybe it was hormones, maybe it was intuition, or maybe 40 years of putting someone else first finally caught up with me. I put on my coat, got in my Honda, he always drove the Mercedes, of course, and drove downtown to St. Cecilia in Buckhead, where Richard liked to take important clients. I told myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid, that I'd laugh about this later. But there he was, in our usual corner booth, the one where we'd celebrated our 30th anniversary, holding hands with a woman young enough to be our daughter. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. But what struck me most wasn't her youth or beauty. It was the way Richard looked at her, adoring, attentive, present. He used to look at me that way, decades ago, before mortgages and children and routine dulled the sparkle. I didn't confront them. I just stood there, partially hidden behind a decorative plant, watching my husband fall in love with someone else right before my eyes. The waiter knew me. We'd been coming to St. Cecilia for years, and his pitying look told me this wasn't the first time Richard had brought her there. I drove home in a daze, put the pot roast away, and went to bed fully clothed. When Richard came home around midnight, smelling of her perfume and whiskey, he was surprised to find me awake, sitting up in bed with the lights on. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can it wait until morning?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I'm exhausted." "Is her name Ashley?" I asked quietly. His face changed then. First confusion, then shock, finally settling into something harder, colder. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. "Linda, you've let yourself go," he said, as if that explained everything. "Ashley makes me feel alive." 40 years of marriage, 3 children, and countless sacrifices reduced to, "You've let yourself go." As if gravity and time and bearing his children hadn't taken their toll on him as well. As if his receding hairline and expanding waistline hadn't been lovingly accepted by me year after year. "I'm 60, not dead," I told him, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. "And I deserve better than this." He moved out the next day. Just like that, 40 years packed into boxes and loaded into his precious Mercedes. Our children took his side, can you believe it? "Dad deserves to be happy," they said, as if my happiness had never been part of the equation. But ladies, this isn't a story about a woman discarded, replaced by a newer model. This isn't a tragedy about the disposability of aging women in our society. No, this is a story about renaissance, about rediscovery, about the unexpected joy that can find you at 60 when you finally put yourself first. Because what Richard couldn't possibly have imagined when he walked out that door was just how alive I was about to become. And honey, that's where this story really gets interesting. I was 20 when I married Richard Thompson, 20 years old with dreams as big as the Chicago skyline. I had just finished my second year at Northwestern's nursing program. Top of my class, thank you very much. My professors said I had a natural gift, that special something that can't be taught. Compassion, they called it. And patience. I was going to be a pediatric nurse, maybe even go on to become a nurse practitioner someday. I had it all mapped out in that detailed way young women do when they think life will follow their carefully laid plans. Then I met Richard at a friend's backyard barbecue in the summer of 1984. He was 25, already working for Coca-Cola in their corporate office, wearing a button-down shirt while everyone else was in t-shirts and shorts. Even in the sweltering Chicago heat, he looked impeccable, cool as could be. When he smiled at me across that crowded yard, I swear time stood still for a moment. He was tall, confident, and looked at me like I was the only person in the world. By our third date, I knew I was in love. By our fifth, he was talking about our future together. "I'm being transferred to Atlanta," he told me over dinner, at this fancy restaurant I could never have afforded on my student budget. "The big headquarters. It's a huge opportunity, Linda. I'll be on the fast track for executive management." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Long-distance relationships rarely worked out, especially back then without all the video chats and instant messages kids have these days. "I want you to come with me," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "As my wife." Just like that. No getting down on one knee, no ring yet, but it didn't matter. I said yes before my brain could catch up with my heart. My parents thought I was crazy. "You're throwing away your education," my father said. "At least finish your degree first," my mother pleaded. But love makes you do crazy things. Richard promised I could finish my nursing degree in Atlanta. "They have excellent schools there," he assured me, "and once we're settled, you can enroll and pick up where you left off." So we got married in a small ceremony at my parents' church. 3 weeks later, we packed everything we owned into his car and a small U-Haul trailer and headed south to Atlanta. The new adventure, the beginning of our life together. I was so excited I could barely breathe. The Atlanta I arrived in back in 1984 was nothing like the sprawling metropolis it is today. We rented a small apartment in Marietta while Richard started his new position at Coca-Cola's headquarters. I looked into nursing programs right away, just like we planned, but there was always a reason to wait. The tuition was too high right then with the new apartment deposit and furniture. The semester had already started. The commute would be too difficult without a second car. "Just give it a little time, honey," Richard would say. "Let me get established first." So I got a job as a receptionist at a doctor's office to help with bills. It wasn't nursing, but it was in the medical field at least. I told myself it was temporary, just for a year or two at most. Then I got pregnant with our first child. Morning sickness hit me hard. The doctor I worked for was understanding at first, but after the third time I had to rush to the bathroom in the middle of checking in a patient, he suggested maybe I should focus on preparing for motherhood. Richard agreed. "We can afford for you to stay home now," he said proudly. "I just got a promotion." And so began my career as a stay-at-home mom. By the time I was 28, I had 3 beautiful children, 2 boys and a girl. Michael came first, then Jennifer 2 years later, and finally, little David. Each pregnancy was harder than the last. By the time David was born, I was so exhausted I could barely remember what it felt like to be that ambitious nursing student from Chicago. Richard's career, meanwhile, was skyrocketing. He traveled constantly, Monday through Thursday most weeks. He'd leave before dawn on Monday mornings, his suitcase packed by me the night before, his shirts ironed just the way he liked them. He'd return late Thursday evening, exhausted, wanting peace and quiet, a home-cooked meal, and clean children who didn't make too much noise. By Friday, he'd have recovered enough to catch up on work from home. Saturdays were for networking on the golf course. Sundays were for family, at least in theory, though he often spent them prepping for the week ahead. "It's just how business works," he'd explain when I expressed frustration about raising 3 kids essentially on my own. "I'm doing this for us, for our family. Do you have any idea how lucky we are? How many men at my level have already been divorced because their wives couldn't handle the lifestyle?" I internalized it all. The lonely nights, the parent-teacher conferences I attended alone, the children's birthday parties Richard missed because of unavoidable meetings, the times he forgot our anniversary, 15 years running, if you're counting. I convinced myself this was normal, that this was what a good wife did: support her husband's career without complaint, raise the children, maintain the home, and never, ever make him feel guilty about his absence. When Richard's mother had her stroke in 1995, there was never any question about what would happen. She moved in with us, of course. I became her caregiver too, helping her bathe, administering her medications, driving her to endless doctor appointments, cooking special meals that accommodated her diabetes and heart condition. She lived with us for 12 years, until she passed away in 2007. 12 years where I never had a full night's sleep, always listening for her bell if she needed help in the night. Richard's mother never liked me much. She thought her son had married beneath him, this girl from Chicago with no college degree. Nothing I did was ever quite right in her eyes. The house wasn't clean enough. The children weren't disciplined enough. The meals weren't to her taste. And Richard, dutiful son that he was, always took her side. "Mom's had a hard life," he'd remind me when I was at my wit's end. "She's just set in her ways." By the time his mother passed away, our oldest was in college, our daughter was finishing high school, and little David, not so little anymore, was in middle school. I was 43 years old, and I looked in the mirror one day and hardly recognized myself. The bright-eyed nursing student was long gone, replaced by a woman with permanent worry lines and premature gray hair I religiously colored every 3 weeks. "Maybe now I could go back to school," I suggested to Richard one evening. "Finish my nursing degree, even part-time." He looked at me like I'd suggested skydiving naked. "At your age? Linda, be realistic. You've been out of academics for over 20 years. The field has completely changed. Besides, who would take care of the house? David still needs his mother." So I let that dream die too. When the kids were all finally out of the house, I thought maybe Richard and I would reconnect, find our way back to that young couple who fell in love in Chicago. Maybe we'd travel together, now that he was at the executive level and could delegate more. There was talk of romantic getaways, second honeymoons. In 40 years of marriage, do you know how many romantic trips we actually took? 3. Our honeymoon to Myrtle Beach. Our 15th anniversary weekend in Savannah, which was cut short when Richard got called back for an emergency at work. And a long weekend in Charleston for our 25th anniversary, where Richard spent most of the time on conference calls by the hotel pool. But Ashley, Richard's secretary? She got taken to Cancun after just 3 months of working with him. A business trip, he called it. I saw the charges on the credit card statement: couples massages, sunset cruises, dinners at restaurants where the entrees cost more than our weekly grocery budget. All those years, I told myself I was making a worthy sacrifice, that Richard's success was our family's success, that my role as the supportive wife was just as important as his role as the breadwinner. I believed that someday, when the kids were grown and Richard was established, it would finally be our time. Last January, I started noticing little things. Not obvious red flags waving in my face, but small disturbances in the pattern of our lives. The first was a Nordstrom charge on our credit card statement. Richard and I shared all accounts, his salary, my name alongside his on everything. That's how marriage worked in our generation. For 40 years, I balanced the checkbook, paid the bills, and kept our financial house in order while he earned the money. So when I saw a $430 charge for lingerie at Nordstrom that I certainly hadn't purchased, my stomach did a little flip. It wasn't my birthday coming up, not our anniversary. And the lingerie certainly wasn't for me. I hadn't received any gifts from Richard in years, let alone something so intimate. Still, I tucked that information away, didn't mention it. Maybe it was a surprise, I told myself, though I knew better. Then came the Saturday golf games that suddenly appeared on his schedule. Richard had played golf for decades at the Druid Hills Golf Club with the same 3 men, executives from different companies who'd all risen through the ranks together. When he mentioned casually over breakfast one Saturday that he was hitting the links with some new clients, I nodded and packed him a sandwich like I always did. But something felt off. The next Saturday, when he mentioned golf again, I called Carol after he left. "I need you to drive me somewhere," I told her, "and don't ask questions." Carol, bless her heart, picked me up 30 minutes later in her Subaru. She's been my best friend since Richard and I moved to Atlanta, the one person who's seen the whole journey. When I asked her to drive me to the Druid Hills Golf Club, she raised her eyebrows but didn't say a word. We sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour. No sign of Richard's Mercedes. "Maybe he's already inside," Carol suggested, but I shook my head. "He always parks where he can see his car from the first tee. Always. He's not here." When I got home, I called the club, disguising my voice slightly. "I'm trying to reach Richard Thompson. I was told he was golfing there today." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young man at the desk replied. "Mr. Thompson isn't on our tee sheet today. In fact, he hasn't been in for a few weeks." That night, when Richard came home with a slight sunburn and talking about his terrible slice on the back 9, I just smiled and served dinner. But inside, the first real crack had formed in the foundation of my trust. The cologne was next. For our entire marriage, Richard had used Old Spice. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just clean and masculine. It was so much a part of him that I associated the scent with safety, with home. Then one morning, as he kissed my cheek before leaving for work, I caught a whiff of something different, something expensive and unfamiliar. That evening, I checked his side of the bathroom cabinet while he was watching television downstairs. There it was, Tom Ford. I looked up the price later online, $150 for a small bottle. The Richard I knew would never spend that kind of money on cologne, but it was the phone that truly gave him away. Richard had never been particularly attached to his cell phone before. He'd leave it on the counter, in his coat pocket, sometimes forget it altogether. Then suddenly, it was always with him, even when he went to the bathroom. I'd catch him smiling at text messages, then quickly putting the phone away when I walked into the room. One night, I woke up around midnight, and Richard wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, phone in hand, texting someone with a slight smile on his face. When he saw me, he quickly put the phone down. "Work stuff," he said. "Go back to bed." "At midnight?" I asked. "International clients," he replied smoothly. "Time difference." I pretended to believe him. The final straw came from my friend Susan. We'd been meeting for lunch at a little Italian place in Vinings every month for years, just to catch up. Susan worked in marketing at Coca-Cola too, though in a different department than Richard. She was divorced, outspoken, and had always intimidated Richard a little, which I secretly enjoyed. "Linda," she said, stirring her iced tea with uncomfortable precision, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." My heart started pounding before she even continued. Somehow, I already knew. I was at St. Cecilia in Buckhead last night with a client. In the back corner, I saw Richard. She paused, reaching across the table to take my hand. He wasn't alone, Linda. He was with a young woman, very young. They were holding hands over champagne, and the way they were looking at each other. I'm so sorry. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. St. Cecilia, our special occasion restaurant, where we'd celebrated our 30th anniversary, where he'd promised me over an expensive bottle of wine that the next decade would be ours, just ours, once he retired. "Blonde?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and far away. "Pretty? Slim?" Susan nodded sadly. "I think it might be his new secretary, Ashley something, the one he mentioned at the Christmas party." Ashley. Of course it was Ashley. 28 years old. Hair always perfect, nails always manicured. I'd met her at the company Christmas party in December. She'd called me ma'am and complimented my brooch, a vintage piece my mother had given me that no young woman would actually admire. Now I realized she'd been assessing me, comparing herself to me, probably thinking how old and worn I looked next to her youth and beauty. When I got home that day, I didn't confront Richard immediately. I waited, watched, gathered more evidence. I checked our cell phone records online and saw dozens of texts between his number and one I didn't recognize, often late at night or during his supposed golf games. I looked at our credit card statements more carefully and found hotel charges in Buckhead, not overnight stays, just day rates. Dinner receipts for two at restaurants I'd never been to. A weekend in Cancun that he'd told me was a business conference. Then I installed a tracking app on his phone while he was sleeping. Technology may confuse me sometimes, but I'm not completely helpless. Our grandson Michael had shown me how to do it when he was worried about his mother driving alone to Florida. "Just in case something happens, Grandma," he'd explained. "I never thought I'd use it to track my husband." The next Saturday, when Richard left for golf, I watched the little blue dot on my iPad move not to Druid Hills Golf Club, but to a high-rise apartment building in Midtown. The dot stayed there for 4 hours. I'd seen enough. That night, after Richard had settled into his recliner with a scotch and the business section of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I stood in front of him, blocking his view of the TV. "We need to talk," I said. "Can it wait until this program is over?" he asked, trying to peer around me. "No, Richard, it can't wait. I know about Ashley." His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. He didn't deny it, didn't even try to. Instead, he set his scotch down carefully on the side table and looked me straight in the eye. "Linda," he said, his voice eerily calm, "you've let yourself go. Ashley makes me feel alive." 5 words. You've let yourself go. 40 years of marriage reduced to a cliché so worn it was almost laughable. As if gravity and childbirth and decades of putting his needs first hadn't taken their toll. As if his receding hairline, expanding waistline, and cholesterol medication were somehow exempt from the rules of aging. And how exactly have I let myself go, Richard? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. By growing old with you? By raising your children? By taking care of your mother for 12 years? Please, enlighten me. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. It's not just physical, Linda. You're always here, always the same. Ashley is exciting. She challenges me, makes me see the world differently. And how old is Ashley, Richard? I asked, though I knew the answer. He hesitated. 28. 28, I repeated. Our daughter is 35, Richard. You're sleeping with someone younger than our own child. He flinched at that. Good. It's not like that, he said. Ashley and I connect on a different level. She understands me. I laughed then, a harsh sound I barely recognized. Of course she does, Richard. She hasn't had 40 years of your broken promises and missed anniversaries. She hasn't raised your children or buried your mother. She hasn't seen you at your worst. Yet. I waited for him to argue, to defend himself, to at least show some shame. Instead, he picked up his scotch again, took a sip, and said, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Linda. But I'm not sorry about Ashley. I love her. And I think we need to talk about separation. I'm 60, not dead. Those words rose up in me like a tide, powerful and unstoppable. I might be 60 years old. I might have silver in my hair and lines around my eyes. But I was still here, still breathing, still capable of anger and hurt, and yes, even passion. Get out, I said quietly. Linda, be reasonable. We should discuss this like adults. Get out. My voice was barely above a whisper now. Pack a bag and get out of this house tonight. You can call your lawyer tomorrow. I'll call mine. He looked surprised. I don't think he expected fight from me. Tears, pleading maybe, but not this cold, hard anger. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, and the absurdity of the question nearly made me laugh again. I'm sure Ashley has room for you in her bed, I replied, since it's where you've been spending most of your time anyway. That night, as I listened to him pack a suitcase upstairs, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine, my hands shaking, but my mind strangely clear. 40 years of marriage was ending, and somehow, beneath the hurt and betrayal, I felt something unexpected stirring, relief, and possibility. I was 60 years old, not dead, and honey, I was about to prove it. By March, Richard had moved out completely. It happened faster than I expected, like he'd been planning his escape for months. Maybe he had. One day I came home from yoga class. Yes, I'd kept going, though I'll tell you more about that later, and found half our closet empty, his dresser drawers cleared out, his favorite books gone from the shelves, his silly golf trophies missing from the mantel. 40 years of marriage, and he managed to extract himself from our home in a matter of hours. He'd moved into one of those sleek glass high-rises in Midtown Atlanta, the kind with a doorman and a rooftop pool, the kind that costs more per month than most people's mortgage payments. I drove by once, just to see. It was all sharp angles and modern lines, everything our warm, lived-in Marietta home wasn't. Our colonial-style house in the suburbs, with its creaky floorboards and overgrown garden, suddenly felt like a relic from another era, which I suppose it was. Richard took the Mercedes, of course, left me the Honda with 87,000 miles on it and a mysterious rattling sound whenever it went over 65 Magnifiquum. You don't drive much anyway, Linda, he'd said, as if doing me a favor. Never mind that I'd been the one to drive his mother to countless doctor appointments for 12 years. Never mind that I'd been the one schlepping our kids to soccer practices and piano lessons and dentist appointments while he was climbing the corporate ladder. The divorce proceedings themselves were surprisingly civilized, at least on paper. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, so I got the house in Marietta, half of our retirement accounts, and a decent alimony arrangement. Our lawyer, who had been our lawyer, but clearly saw Richard as the real client, explained everything in that condescending tone people use with women of a certain age. Like I couldn't possibly understand concepts like assets and equity, despite having balanced our household budget for 4 decades. "Linda, you're getting a very fair settlement," he assured me, peering over his reading glasses. "Many women in your position would be thrilled." Many women in my position. As if there was a support group somewhere for 60-year-old women discarded for their husbands' secretaries. Maybe there should be. The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings or the financial arrangements. It wasn't even watching Richard move on so quickly, although that certainly stung. No, the hardest part was the reaction of our children. I'd always prided myself on being close to our kids. I was the one who had been there day in and day out, the one who knew which foods they wouldn't eat, which nightmares scared them most, which friends had broken their hearts in middle school. I was the one who kept the family together while Richard built his career. So when all 3 of them essentially sided with their father, it felt like a betrayal deeper than anything Richard had done. "Mom, you have to understand," Jennifer said over coffee one day, stirring her latte with careful precision. "Dad deserves to be happy, and I don't?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant. It's just, you've always been so self-sufficient, so content with your life." Content. Was that how they saw me? As some sort of placid, unambitious housewife who needed nothing more than a clean home and dinner on the table by 6? Had I really portrayed myself that way all these years? Michael, our oldest, was even more direct. "Mom, marriages end. People grow apart. It happens all the time." "Your father didn't grow apart from me," I said. "He traded me in for a younger model." "That's a little dramatic, don't you think?" he replied, with that slightly patronizing smile he'd inherited from Richard. "Ashley is actually very intelligent. She has an MBA from Emory." Of course she did. Good for Ashley. David, our youngest, was the only one who showed any real sympathy, but even he seemed to think I should just accept the situation gracefully. "You're both adults, Mom," he said during one of his rare visits. "You've had a good run. 40 years is a long time." A good run. Like we were a Broadway show that had finally closed after a successful season. Like 4 decades of marriage was some sort of achievement in endurance rather than what I thought it was, a lifelong commitment. The worst part was that all 3 of them seemed to expect me to maintain the family peace, to continue hosting holiday dinners, to smile politely when Richard eventually brought Ashley around. As if my pain was an inconvenient disruption to the family dynamic. As if I should set aside my hurt and betrayal for the sake of everyone else's comfort, just as I had been doing my entire married life. "We're still a family," Jennifer insisted. "That doesn't have to change." But it had changed, irrevocably, and I was tired of pretending otherwise. Friends weren't much better. Some disappeared entirely, unsure which side to take in the divorce. Country club acquaintances suddenly found their schedules too busy for our regular lunch dates. Couples we'd known for decades invited Richard and Ashley to dinner parties, but somehow forgot to include me. It was as if divorced women in their 60s were somehow contagious, carriers of a disease that might infect other marriages. There were exceptions, of course. My friend Carol, for one, who had been divorced herself years earlier and knew exactly what I was going through. And Susan, from Richard's office, who kept me updated on workplace gossip with a gleeful sense of justice. But mostly, I found myself adrift in a social landscape I hardly recognized, trying to redefine myself as something other than Mrs. Richard Thompson. The funny thing was, underneath all the hurt and betrayal and anger, I began to feel something unexpected. Relief. Like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even known I was carrying. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to consider anyone else's needs before my own. I didn't have to worry about Richard's schedule or preferences or moods. I didn't have to stifle my own desires for the sake of family harmony. I started doing little things at first. I painted the guest bedroom a deep burgundy color that Richard had always hated. I bought an expensive set of silky sheets just for myself. I started watching documentaries instead of golf on Sunday afternoons. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a scraggly orange tomcat with one ear, despite Richard's lifelong insistence that he was allergic. He wasn't. He just didn't like cats. I named the cat Freedom. One evening in late April, about 2 months after Richard moved out, I was sitting on the back porch with a glass of Pinot Noir, watching the sunset with Freedom purring in my lap. The azaleas were blooming in riotous pink clouds along the fence line. A warm spring breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's yard. Birds were settling in for the night with sleepy chirps and rustles. And suddenly, I started to laugh. Not a small chuckle, but a deep, full-bodied laugh that seemed to come from somewhere I hadn't accessed in years. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until Freedom jumped off my lap in alarm, until I had to set down my wine glass for fear of spilling it. Because it had just hit me. I was free. Really, truly free. At 60 years old, I had my health, my house, half of a very comfortable retirement fund, and absolutely no one to answer to but myself. For the first time since I was 20 years old, my life was entirely my own. The laughter eventually subsided into a kind of quiet wonder. I sipped my wine and watched the sky turn from gold to pink to deepening blue. An unexpected thought surfaced. What if Richard leaving wasn't the end of my life, but the beginning of something entirely new? What if the best was yet to come? I didn't know it then, but that moment on the porch was when my real life started. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as the support system for someone else's dreams, but as Linda, just Linda, 60 years old and finally ready to discover who she really was. My friend Carol had been trying to get me out of the house for weeks. "Linda, you can't just sit in that empty house like some kind of ghost," she said over the phone one Tuesday morning. "Richard's moved on. It's time you did too." I wanted to tell her that it wasn't that simple. That 40 years of marriage doesn't just wash away like yesterday's dishes. That at 60, starting over seemed about as likely as climbing Mount Everest in high heels. But Carol wasn't the type to accept excuses. She never had been, not since we met in our 30s when our kids were in the same kindergarten class. "I've signed us up for yoga," she announced. "Saturday morning at 10. "Yoga?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Carol, I'm 60 years old. The only thing that bends easily on my body are my feelings." "It's a beginner's class," she insisted. "Core Power Yoga in Decatur. They have special classes for people our age." "Our age? You mean senior citizens?" The words felt bitter on my tongue. "I mean people with wisdom and life experience," Carol corrected. "People who deserve to take care of their bodies after decades of taking care of everyone else." That was Carol, always able to reframe things so they sounded like opportunities instead of obligations. Still, I resisted. "I don't even have workout clothes," I argued weakly. "Perfect excuse to go shopping," Carol countered. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at 3. We'll go to Lenox Square." That's how I found myself, at 60 years old, trying on Lululemon workout pants in a fitting room with lighting so harsh it should be illegal for anyone over 30. Carol was in the next stall, chattering excitedly about the benefits of yoga, flexibility, strength, mindfulness. "You'll love it, Linda," she called over the partition. "My neighbor Martha started at 65, and now she can touch her toes for the first time since high school." "Touching my toes is low on my priority list right now," I muttered, tugging at the stretchy fabric clinging to my thighs. When did I develop these little pockets of flesh above my knees? Had they always been there, or were they new additions to the landscape of my aging body? The salesgirl, young enough to be my granddaughter, knocked cheerfully on my door. "How are we doing in there? Need a different size?" "We're doing just fine," I said, wondering when salespeople had started using the royal "we" when addressing customers. As if we were in this together, this humiliating experience of confronting my 60-year-old body under fluorescent lights. I ended up buying 2 pairs of black yoga pants and 3 loose tops that promised to wick away moisture. The bill made me wince, but Carol beamed as if I'd just made a down payment on a new life. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, tugging at my new athletic wear, wondering if I should just call Carol and cancel. I could fake a headache. Or better yet, a back problem. Wasn't that a perfect excuse to avoid yoga? But before I could reach for my phone, the doorbell rang. Carol, 15 minutes early as usual. "You look great," she exclaimed when I opened the door. She was wearing similar black pants, but with a bright pink top that matched her lipstick. Carol had always been colorful, in both her wardrobe and her personality. "Ready to stretch your way to a new life?" "That's a lot of pressure to put on a yoga class," I said dryly. The Core Power Yoga Studio in Decatur was housed in a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors. The reception area smelled of essential oils and new rubber mats. Young, lithe women in colorful leggings milled about, holding metal water bottles and chatting about things like chakras and vinyasas, words that sounded like exotic desserts to my untrained ear. I leaned close to Carol. "I think we're the oldest people here by about 3 decades. "Nonsense," she whispered back. "There's a woman over there who's at least 50. Great. 50 seemed positively adolescent to me now. We signed in at the front desk, where a perky young woman with a high ponytail handed us rental mats that smelled strongly of disinfectant. "You're going to love Derek's class," she chirped. "He's amazing with beginners." Carol nudged me. "Derek, sounds promising." "Stop it," I hissed. "I'm not here for that." But when Derek walked into the studio, I understood why the class was so popular. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean, muscular build that comes from years of disciplined practice rather than obsessive gym sessions. His dark hair had touches of silver at the temples, and when he smiled at the class, deep lines appeared around his green eyes. He wasn't a young man, but he wasn't anywhere near my age either. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice warm and resonant. "Let's begin in a comfortable seated position on your mats." There was nothing comfortable about sitting cross-legged on a thin mat on a hard floor, but I followed instructions, trying to ignore the creaking in my knees as I lowered myself down. For the next hour, Derek guided us through gentle stretches and basic poses with names like Downward Dog and Warrior One. He moved around the room, making small adjustments to people's postures. When he came to me, his touch was light but confident as he helped align my shoulders. "Beautiful," he said quietly. "Now breathe into the stretch." I felt a flush creep up my neck that had nothing to do with exertion. By the end of class, I was sweating more than I had in years, but strangely exhilarated. Derek had us lie on our backs for the final relaxation pose, and as I closed my eyes, I realized I hadn't thought about Richard or the divorce or my uncertain future for a full hour. My mind had been entirely occupied with not falling over while standing on one leg. After class, Carol and I rolled up our rental mats, my arms pleasantly tired from the unfamiliar movements. "So, wasn't that wonderful?" Carol asked, her face flushed with exercise and triumph. "It was interesting," I admitted. I didn't hate it. Coming from me, this was high praise, and Carol knew it. She grinned and squeezed my arm. "We're definitely coming back next week." As we turned to leave, Derek approached us, his towel draped around his neck. "First time?" he asked, looking directly at me. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, suddenly self-conscious about my sweat-dampened hair and flushed face. "You did great," he said. "Most people can't hold tree pose for nearly as long on their first try. You must have good balance." "Years of standing in one place cooking dinner," I joked. He smiled, and those crinkles appeared around his eyes again. Up close, I could see that he was older than I'd initially thought. Not 60, certainly, but definitely not some 20-something yoga instructor. "I'm Derek," he said, extending his hand. "Linda," I replied, taking it. His palm was warm and dry against mine. "And this is my friend Carol." "Nice to meet you both," he said, though his eyes stayed on me. "Will you be coming back?" Before I could formulate a non-committal response, Carol jumped in. "Absolutely, we just signed up for the monthly package." "We did?" I turned to her in surprise. "While you were in the bathroom," she said innocently. "I thought I'd save us both the trouble of weekly registration." Derek laughed. "Well, I'm glad to hear it. I teach the Saturday morning beginner class every week, plus Tuesday and Thursday evenings at 6. "Good to know," Carol said meaningfully. After we said goodbye and were walking to the car, I turned on her. "Monthly package? Really, Carol?" "Oh, come on," she said, unlocking her Subaru with a beep. "Did you see the way he looked at you? Not at me, not at those 20-something girls in the front row. At you, Linda." "Don't be ridiculous," I scoffed, buckling my seatbelt. He was being polite. "He was being interested," Carol insisted. "And he's gorgeous. Those shoulders, those eyes." "He's also at least 20 years younger than me," I pointed out. 18 years, Max, Carol estimated. "I'd put him at early 40s. And so what? Richard's girlfriend is half his age. Why shouldn't you have some fun?" "Because I'm 60, and I have stretch marks older than most of the people in that yoga class," I said flatly. Carol put the car in reverse, but kept her foot on the brake. She turned to look at me directly. "Linda Thompson, for 40 years you've put everyone else first. Richard, the kids, Richard's mother, even the damn PTA. When are you going to do something for yourself? Just once?" I looked out the window at the bright spring day. Cherry blossoms were blooming along the street, their pale pink petals occasionally drifting down in the gentle breeze. After a long Atlanta winter, the world was renewing itself, starting fresh. Maybe Carol had a point. "Fine," I said. "I'll go back next week, but just for the exercise." Carol grinned and backed out of the parking space. Of course, just for the exercise. But as we drove back to Marietta, I found myself thinking about green eyes and a warm smile, about the way Derek had looked at me, not as someone's mother or grandmother, not as an aging woman well past her prime, but simply as a woman. It had been so long since a man had looked at me that way that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. And it felt good. Really, really good. 6 weeks of coffee became walks in Piedmont Park. Derek talked to me about books, travel, dreams. Richard hadn't asked about my dreams since 1985. One evening, by the lake, he stopped and said, "Linda, I can't pretend anymore. You're all I think about." Then he kissed me. Ladies, I'm 60 years old. I haven't been kissed like that since... Actually, I've never been kissed like that. My knees actually buckled. At 60, that moment by the lake changed everything. But let me back up and tell you how we got there. After that first yoga class, I found myself actually looking forward to Saturday mornings. I'd set out my yoga clothes the night before, wake up early to wash my face and put on a touch of mascara. Just a touch, mind you, nothing obvious. I told myself it was because exercise was good for me, that at 60 I needed to stay active and flexible. I wasn't fooling Carol, who'd text me every Friday night. "Ready to see Derek tomorrow?" But I was certainly trying to fool myself. The second class was easier than the first. My muscles remembered some of the poses, and I didn't feel quite so awkward. Derek moved around the room with that same gentle confidence, making small adjustments here and there. When he came to help me with a pose called Warrior 2, his hands were warm and steady on my shoulders. "Beautiful, Linda," he murmured, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. After class, he approached as Carol and I were rolling up our mats. "How was that?" he asked. "Better," I admitted. "I only fell over twice." He laughed. "That's progress. Coffee again?" Before I could answer, Carol chimed in. "Linda would love to, but I've got a dentist appointment. You two go ahead." She winked at me so obviously that I wanted to melt into the floor. So there we were, sitting across from each other at that little cafe near the yoga studio. Me, 60 years old, with my hair pulled back in a sweaty ponytail, and Derek, in his early 40s, looking like he'd just stepped out of a fitness magazine. What on earth did he want with me? "How long have you been teaching yoga?" I asked, desperate for safe conversation. "About 10 years, he said. "Before that, I was in corporate finance." I nearly choked on my latte. "Finance? That's unexpected. 60-hour weeks, constant stress, high blood pressure at 32, he said, shaking his head. Had a panic attack in the middle of a board meeting. That was my wake-up call. As he spoke about his former life, I realized he wasn't what I'd expected. Not some young, carefree yoga instructor who'd never known struggle. He'd lived another life entirely, one not so different from Richard's, in fact. But he'd chosen a different path. "What about you?" he asked. "Carol mentioned you're recently divorced?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. After 40 years of marriage, my husband left me for his 28-year-old secretary. The words still stung, but not as sharply as they once had. "His loss," Derek said simply. No platitudes, no awkward sympathy, just those two words. His loss. That coffee turned into lunch, which turned into a walk along the Atlanta Beltline, admiring the street art and watching the afternoon light filter through the trees. We talked about books we loved. He was a voracious reader, particularly fond of historical fiction. We talked about places we'd traveled. He'd backpacked through Europe after leaving his finance job, something he called his midlife reboot. And we talked about family. His parents still lived in Minnesota, his sister in Seattle with her wife and 2 children. "What about you?" he asked as we paused on a bridge overlooking the old railway line. "What are your dreams, Linda?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me completely off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked about my dreams? Richard certainly hadn't, not in decades. Our children asked about my health, my house, my activities, practical things. But dreams? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I forgot to have dreams somewhere along the way." Derek didn't look pitying or judgmental. He just nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe that's where we start. Rediscovering what you want." We, as if we were in this together. As if my dreams mattered to him too. That first coffee date turned into a weekly ritual. Saturday mornings, yoga with Derek, followed by coffee and conversation. Sometimes Carol joined us, sometimes not. We'd sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Books, politics, childhood memories, silly TV shows we secretly enjoyed. I learned that he loved spicy food, but couldn't stand cilantro. That he rescued his cat, Gandhi, from a shelter 5 years ago. That he could speak passable French from a semester abroad in college. And slowly, I started sharing bits of myself too. Not the polished, perfect version I'd presented to the world as Mrs. Richard Thompson, but the real me. The me who secretly enjoyed romance novels but hid them behind literary classics on her bookshelf. The me who had wanted to go back to nursing school after the kids were grown, but had let Richard talk her out of it. The me who still danced around her kitchen when she was home alone, playing the Motown records of her youth. After 3 weeks, our coffees extended into walks, first around the neighborhood, then to nearby parks. Piedmont Park became our favorite. With its winding paths and tranquil lake, it was the perfect setting for our meandering conversations. We'd stroll for hours, watching dogs chase frisbees, children climb playgrounds, couples lounging on blankets in the sun. One Tuesday evening, after I'd mentioned I'd never tried Thai food, Derek invited me to dinner at a little restaurant in Virginia Highland. I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, finally settling on a simple navy dress I'd bought years ago for a company dinner with Richard but had never worn. When Derek picked me up, his eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made me believe him. That night, as we shared plates of pad thai and green curry, our knees occasionally brushing under the small table, something shifted between us. The conversation flowed as easily as ever, but there was a new undercurrent, a gentle tension that made me acutely aware of every smile, every glance, every accidental touch. As he drove me home, I found myself both hoping and fearing he might try to kiss me. But he didn't. He walked me to my door, waited until I was safely inside, and left with a simple, "Good night, Linda. I had a wonderful time." Our walks became more frequent. Weekday evenings after his last yoga class, Sunday afternoons when the park was filled with families and the air smelled of barbecue and freshly cut grass. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, our bodies naturally matching pace, our conversations flowing without effort. It was on one such evening walk, 6 weeks after that first coffee, that everything changed. We'd been circling the lake at Piedmont Park, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The spring air was warm and sweet with the scent of magnolias. We'd been talking about childhood memories. I'd been telling him about growing up in Chicago, about ice skating on frozen ponds in winter, and how different it was from the gentler seasons of Atlanta. Suddenly, in the middle of my story, Derek stopped walking. When I turned to look at him, his expression was different, intense, focused. "What is it?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "Linda," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I can't pretend anymore. You're all I think about." Before I could process his words, he took a step closer, gently cupped my face in his hands, and kissed me. Soft at first, a question rather than a demand. And then, when I didn't pull away, deeper. "Ladies, I'm 60 years old. I've been kissed before. I was married for 40 years, for heaven's sake. But this was different. This was like a first kiss and a last kiss all at once. This was like coming home to a place I'd never been." My knees actually buckled. At 60. Like some teenager in a movie, I felt my knees go weak beneath me, and Derek's arm slid around my waist to steady me. When we finally broke apart, I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. All those weeks of friendship, of conversation, of slowly rebuilding my sense of self after Richard's betrayal, it had all been leading to this moment by the lake, with the setting sun turning the water to fire and my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "I've wanted to do that since the first day I met you," Derek said softly, his hand still warm on my waist. "But I didn't want to rush you. Didn't want you to think this was just, I don't know, a rebound, or something casual." "And what is it?" I asked, finding my voice at last. He smiled, those crinkles appearing around his green eyes. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'd like to find out. If you would." I looked at this man, this kind, thoughtful, wonderful man who was 18 years younger than me. Who could have anyone? Probably had his pick of those lithe 20-somethings in his yoga classes. And for some reason I couldn't fathom, he wanted me. "I'm 60 years old, Derek," I said, feeling I had to remind him, maybe remind myself. "I know how old you are, Linda," he replied with a slight smile. "I'm 42. Now that we've established our basic math skills, can I please kiss you again?" And so I let him. Standing there by the lake in Piedmont Park, with dog walkers and joggers passing by, not caring who might see us. For the first time in my life, I stopped worrying about what other people might think. Stopped questioning whether I deserved happiness. Stopped feeling like an aging, discarded wife and started feeling like, well, like a woman, desired, appreciated, alive. Let's be real. I was terrified. 3 kids, 60 years old, everything heads south at this age. But Derek? He looked at me like I was a goddess, said I was exquisite. Richard hadn't seen me naked with the lights on since 2003. But here's what nobody tells you about sex at 60. It's better. No pregnancy worries, no rushing, you know what you want and you're not afraid to ask for it. Plus, honey, yoga instructors are very flexible. I'm having the best sex of my life at 60. There I said it. That first kiss by the lake at Piedmont Park changed everything between Derek and me. We stayed there until the sun had completely set, talking and kissing like teenagers, oblivious to the joggers and dog walkers passing by. When he finally drove me home, I felt lighter somehow, as if years had fallen away from my shoulders. "When can I see you again?" he asked as we sat in his car outside my house in Marietta. "Tomorrow?" I suggested, surprised by my own boldness. He smiled that smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Lunch? I know a great little place in Virginia Highland." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of lunches, dinners, walks in the park, and increasingly passionate goodnight kisses. Derek was a gentleman in every sense of the word, attentive, respectful, never pushing beyond what I seemed comfortable with. And that was the problem. I was ready for more, but terrified to say so. "So, are you sleeping with him yet?" Carol asked bluntly over coffee one morning. We were sitting in her sunny kitchen, far from the yoga studio and prying ears. I nearly choked on my blueberry muffin. "Carol, that's private." "That's a no then," she said, stirring her coffee with unnecessary vigor. "What are you waiting for?" What was I waiting for? The question haunted me all the way home. It wasn't as if Derek hadn't made his interest clear. Just the night before, our goodbye kiss at my front door had grown so heated that I'd actually considered inviting him in. But something had held me back, a mixture of insecurity and fear that had nothing to do with Derek and everything to do with me. The truth was, I was terrified of being naked in front of him. Richard had been the only man I'd been with for 40 years, and in the later decades of our marriage, sex had become a perfunctory, lights-off affair. Quick, mechanical, more about scratching an itch than connecting. And in the past few years, almost non-existent. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that night, really looking at myself. The silver-streaked hair, the lines around my eyes and mouth, the slight sag of my neck, the breasts that had nursed 3 children and now rested lower than they once had. The soft roundness of my belly, marked with silvery stretch marks from pregnancies decades ago. The thighs that touched no matter how many yoga classes I attended. This was the body of a 60-year-old woman who had lived a full life. Not the body of the 20-year-old Richard had married. Not the body of the women in Derek's yoga classes with their tight leggings and toned arms. Would he be disappointed? Would he try to hide his disappointment? Would this magical connection between us evaporate the moment the lights came on and he saw me? Really saw me? 2 days later, Derek invited me to dinner at his place. "I want to cook for you," he said. "Nothing fancy, just homemade pasta and a good bottle of wine." His apartment was in a renovated warehouse in Inman Park, all exposed brick and gleaming hardwood floors. One wall was entirely bookshelves, packed with volumes on every subject imaginable. Another featured a collection of framed black and white photographs, landscapes mostly, stark and beautiful. "Did you take these?" I asked, examining a particularly striking image of a lone tree on a hillside. "Photography's a hobby," he said, setting 2 glasses of red wine on the coffee table. "I do a bit of hiking, take the camera along. Nothing professional." "They're beautiful," I said, meaning it. Dinner was indeed simple but delicious. Fresh pasta with a light tomato sauce, garlic bread, a crisp salad. We talked easily as we ate, about books we'd loved, places we wanted to visit, music that moved us. The wine loosened my tongue, made me laugh more freely. I felt comfortable with Derek in a way I hadn't felt with anyone in years, perhaps ever. After dinner, we moved to the couch with our wine glasses. Derek put on some jazz, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, and the soft, melancholy notes filled the apartment. When he sat beside me, his thigh touching mine, something electric passed between us. "Linda," he said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're so beautiful." I laughed nervously. "Derek, I'm 60 years old. Beautiful isn't really in my vocabulary anymore." His expression grew serious. "Why not?" "Look at me," I said, gesturing vaguely at myself. "I'm old. I have wrinkles and gray hair, and parts of me sag that didn't used to." "I am looking at you," he said. "I see a gorgeous woman with incredible eyes that light up when she laughs. I see someone vibrant and alive and sexy as hell." "Sexy?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "Incredibly sexy," he confirmed, leaning closer. "From the first day I saw you in yoga class, I haven't been able to think about much else." His kiss was gentle at first, then increasingly urgent. I felt myself responding, my body remembering desires I thought had long since faded. When his hand slid under the hem of my blouse to caress the skin of my waist, I didn't stop him. When he whispered, "Stay with me tonight," against my ear, I nodded. But as he led me toward the bedroom, panic fluttered in my chest. "Derek," I said, pulling back slightly, "I need you to know, it's been a long time for me, and I don't look like I used to." He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. "Linda, I don't want who you used to be or what you used to look like. I want you exactly as you are right now. But, no buts," he said firmly. "You're exquisite to me. Every line, every curve, every mark on your body tells the story of your life. And it's a life I find fascinating and beautiful." In his bedroom, with only the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminating the space, Derek undressed me with a reverence I'd never experienced before. There was no rush, no fumbling, just a slow, deliberate unveiling. And when I stood before him, completely naked for the first time, I fought the urge to cover myself. "Breathe," he whispered, as if he could sense my anxiety. And then, "You're stunning." The look in his eyes wasn't disguised disappointment or polite acceptance. It was genuine desire, open and honest. He wanted me, all of me, exactly as I was. What happened next was nothing short of transformative. At 60 years old, I discovered what it meant to truly make love with someone who saw me, who took the time to learn my body, who cared about my pleasure as much as his own. It wasn't just good, it was revelatory. Here's what nobody tells you about sex after 60. It can be better than it ever was before. There's no worry about pregnancy, no children to interrupt or overhear, no insecurities about what you should do or how you should look. There's just the wisdom of experience, the confidence to ask for what you want, and the patience to savor every moment. Plus, as it turns out, yoga instructors really are extraordinarily flexible. When I woke the next morning in Derek's bed, sunlight streaming through the blinds, I felt a moment of panic. How did I look? Was my makeup smeared? My hair a mess? But then Derek rolled over, still half asleep, and pulled me against him, pressing a kiss to my bare shoulder. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured. And just like that, the panic dissolved. This man, this kind, wonderful man, saw me differently than I saw myself. Through his eyes, I wasn't just an aging woman clinging to the remnants of her youth. I was desirable, vibrant, alive. Over the next few weeks, our relationship deepened in every way. We spent most nights together, either at his apartment or at my house in Marietta. We cooked together, read together, talked for hours about everything and nothing. And yes, we made love, often, enthusiastically, and with an abandon I hadn't thought possible at my age. "I'm having the best sex of my life at 60, I confessed to Carol over lunch one day, my voice lowered despite the noisy restaurant. "There, I said it." Carol's delighted laugh drew glances from nearby tables. "Of course you are. You finally found a man who knows what he's doing." "It's not just that," I tried to explain. I don't know. It's like I've finally given myself permission to enjoy my body, to stop apologizing for it." "About damn time," Carol declared, raising her water glass in a toast. "To Linda 2.0, better than the original." I laughed and clinked my glass against hers. "To second chances," I said, "at any age. And that's the truth of it, ladies. At 60, I'm having experiences I never thought possible. I'm learning that age isn't the barrier I thought it was, that passion and desire don't have an expiration date, that my body, with all its imperfections, is still capable of giving and receiving immense pleasure. Most importantly, I'm learning that it's never too late to rediscover yourself, to rewrite your story, to experience joy in ways you'd forgotten were possible. And if that lesson has to come in the form of a handsome 42-year-old yoga instructor, well, I'm not complaining. Richard found out about Derek and me in the most modern way possible, through Facebook. I hadn't even known I was on Facebook until Jennifer, my daughter, set up an account for me last Christmas. "So you can see the grandkids' photos," she'd explained, showing me how to scroll through my feed, whatever that meant. I rarely used it, honestly. Couldn't see the point of announcing my every thought to the world. But Derek had convinced me to go to a performance of Wicked at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, a spectacular old movie palace from the 1920s that had been restored to its original splendor. I'd never been, even after living in Atlanta for 4 decades. Richard always claimed to hate musicals, so we'd stuck to symphony performances on the rare occasions he'd taken me out. Derek not only bought tickets for third-row center seats, but also arranged for a backstage tour after the show. Said he had a friend who worked in production. The whole evening was magical. The soaring music, the elaborate costumes, the story of 2 women whose friendship transcended everything. I found myself crying during For Good, a song about how knowing someone can change you forever. Derek had reached over and squeezed my hand in the darkened theater, somehow understanding exactly what I was feeling. Afterward, in the glittering lobby with its ornate ceiling and grand staircase, Derek had asked another theater-goer to take our picture. We stood close together, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling broadly. I hadn't seen myself look that happy well, I couldn't remember the last time. Derek had posted that photo to his Facebook page and tagged me, something I barely understood at the time. Derek Lawson is with Linda Thompson at the Fox Theater, the caption read, followed by a simple heart emoji. That's all it took. Within hours, my rarely used Facebook account was flooded with notifications. Friends from Richard's company, country club acquaintances, even distant family members were suddenly very interested in who this handsome younger man was and why his arm was around my waist. And then, of course, Richard called. It was a Tuesday evening, about a week after the Fox Theater date. I was in the kitchen making a stir-fry, another thing Derek had introduced me to. Richard had always insisted on meat and potatoes, claiming that foreign food upset his stomach. But it turned out I loved Thai flavors, Chinese spices, Indian curries. My kitchen, once a place of routine, had become a laboratory of new experiences. When the phone rang and I saw Richard's name on the caller ID, I nearly let it go to voicemail. But 40 years of conditioning is hard to break. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Hello, Richard. What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury I recognized all too well. "I'm making dinner," I replied calmly, though my heart had begun to race. "Is there something you needed?" "Don't play dumb with me, Linda. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Who is this person you're parading around with? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" Embarrassing. That was his concern. Not whether I was happy or healing or moving forward with my life, but whether I was embarrassing him. "His name is Derek Lawson," I said, surprised at how steady my voice remained. "He's a yoga instructor and a wonderful man." Richard made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. "A yoga instructor? Are you serious? You're embarrassing yourself, Linda. A 60-year-old woman with a boy toy." Something inside me snapped then. All the hurt, all the betrayal, all the years of putting his needs first, it crystallized into a cold, hard clarity. "He's 42, Richard, not 22. Your girlfriend, however, could be your granddaughter." Silence on the line, just for a moment. Then, "That's different." "How exactly is it different?" I asked, genuinely curious about what mental gymnastics he was performing. "I'm a man," he said, as if that explained everything. I laughed then, a real laugh, full and genuine. "Oh, Richard, is that really the best you can do?" "People are talking, Linda. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I don't particularly care what it looks like," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. For the first time in 40 years, I'm doing something because it makes me happy, not because it looks good to your colleagues or country club friends. "The kids are upset," he tried next, switching tactics. "About me dating someone, or about you leaving me for your secretary?" I countered. They think it's inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I echoed, feeling heat rise to my cheeks now. Their father left their mother for a woman younger than them, but I'm the inappropriate one? You're their mother, Richard said, as if that explained everything. You're supposed to be dignified. And you're their father, I replied. You were supposed to honor your wedding vows. That hit home. I could practically hear him flinching through the phone. Linda, be reasonable, he said, his voice softening into that cajoling tone he'd always used when he wanted something from me. Think about how this affects the family. Think about the grandchildren. The grandchildren. Richard's ultimate trump card. As if our grandchildren, aged 8, 6, and 3, had any concept of or interest in their grandparents' love lives. As if seeing their grandmother happy would somehow traumatize them more than seeing their grandfather leave their grandmother for a woman barely older than their parents. The grandchildren will be just fine, I said firmly. Children are remarkably adaptable, as you well know. Now, is there anything else? My dinner is getting cold. This isn't over, Linda, Richard warned. Actually, Richard, it is. It's been over since you chose Ashley. Good night. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or upset, from something that felt remarkably like power. For 40 years, Richard's approval had been the barometer of my worth. His mood had dictated the atmosphere in our home. His needs had shaped my days. And now, with a few simple words, I'd freed myself from all of that. The phone rang again almost immediately. Richard, no doubt, unused to not having the last word. I let it go to voicemail. When it rang a third time, I turned the ringer off completely and went back to my stir-fry. By the time Derek arrived an hour later, I had a beautiful meal prepared and was feeling more myself again. "Everything okay?" he asked, kissing my cheek as he came in. "You seem a little tense." I considered brushing it off, saying everything was fine, my default response for decades. But this was a new chapter. "Richard called," I said simply. He saw our photo from the Fox Theater. Derek's expression grew concerned. Was he upset? He was. "Richard," I replied with a small smile, concerned about appearances, worried what people might think, invoking the grandchildren. "And how are you feeling about it?" Derek asked, taking my hands in his. That simple question, how I felt, what I wanted, still caught me by surprise sometimes. It had been so long since anyone had centered my feelings in a conversation. "Honestly, I feel free," I told him. For the first time, maybe ever, I stood up for what I wanted without apologizing or backpedaling or putting someone else first. Derek smiled that smile that still made my heart skip. "I'm proud of you," he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. The next day, both Jennifer and Michael called, separately, but with essentially the same message, concern about my relationship choices and how "this isn't like you, Mom," and "have you really thought this through?" I listened patiently to both of them. They were adults with their own lives, but they'd never seen me as anything but their mother, the woman who made their lunches and drove them to soccer practice and waited up for them on prom night. The woman who had quietly stepped back so their father could shine. They had no frame of reference for this new version of me, a woman with desires and dreams of her own. "I understand your concern," I told Jennifer during our call. "But I'm happy, truly happy, maybe for the first time in a very long time. I hope that matters to you." There was a long pause on the line. "Of course it matters, Mom," she finally said, her voice softer. I don't want to see you get hurt." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I'm 60 years old. I've survived heartbreak before. I think I can handle myself." After I hung up, I sat for a long time in my garden, watching butterflies flit between the late summer flowers. For decades, I'd allowed others to define me as a wife, a mother, a grandmother. Roles that were important, yes, but not the sum total of who I was. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of Linda, the woman with her own desires, her own dreams, her own capacity for joy. But she wasn't lost anymore. She was right here, sitting in the sunshine, ready for whatever came next. My life now? It's so different from what I imagined it would be at 60 that sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. When I was in my 20s, I had this very specific vision of what my 60s would look like. Richard and I in rocking chairs on the porch of our Marietta home, watching grandchildren play in the yard, maybe taking the occasional cruise to celebrate our retirement. Comfortable, predictable, safe. Instead, here I am, 60 years old, divorced, and dating a 42-year-old yoga instructor who takes me salsa dancing in Virginia Highland on Friday nights. The first time Derek suggested salsa dancing, I laughed out loud. "Derek, I'm 60, I reminded him. "The only dancing I've done in the last 20 years is swaying awkwardly at our kids' weddings." "So," he said with that infectious smile, "dancing isn't about age. It's about feeling the music, connecting with your partner, and having fun." "I don't know the steps," I protested weakly. "Neither do I," he admitted. "We'll learn together." And so, on a warm Friday evening in late spring, I found myself in a little Cuban restaurant in Virginia Highland, a trendy neighborhood in Atlanta that I'd driven past 100 times but never actually explored. The place was small and intimate, with colorful art on the walls, ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead, and the scent of cilantro and lime in the air. A small band played in the corner, just 3 older men with weathered faces and nimble fingers, coaxing the most incredible sounds from their instruments. Derek ordered mojitos for both of us, another first for me. Richard had been strictly a Scotch and wine man, declaring cocktails frivolous. The mint was fresh and bright, the rum warming me from the inside out. When Derek led me to the small dance floor, I felt a moment of panic. What was I doing here? I was old enough to be the mother of most of the people in this place. Surely they were looking at us, judging the older woman with her younger man. But when I looked around, nobody was paying us any attention. Everyone was focused on their own partners, their own conversations, their own enjoyment of the evening. And when Derek put his hand on the small of my back and began to guide me through the basic salsa step, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, he counted softly, everything else faded away. I stepped on his toes more than once. I got the rhythm wrong. I laughed too loudly when I made mistakes. But Derek just kept smiling, kept guiding me, kept telling me I was doing great. And after a while, I started to believe him. By the end of the night, we were both sweaty and breathless and grinning like fools. "Same time next week?" Derek asked as he drove me home. I nodded, too tired and happy to speak. Salsa dancing became our Friday night ritual. Each week, I got a little better, a little more confident. The restaurant owners, Marta and Javier, began to greet us by name when we arrived. The band would sometimes play our favorite song when they saw us come in. We became part of a community I never knew existed in the city I'd lived in for 40 years. One weekend in July, Derek surprised me with another first, a weekend trip to Savannah. Just the two of us. "I've booked 2 rooms at a bed and breakfast in the historic district," he said, clearly anticipating my hesitation. No pressure. I just thought it would be nice to get away for a couple of days, see the sights, walk along the riverfront. In 40 years of marriage, Richard and I had taken precisely 3 weekend trips together. 3. And here was Derek, planning a getaway after just a few months of dating. I said yes before I could overthink it. Savannah in summer is hot and humid and utterly magical. The Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oak trees, the ornate ironwork on the balconies of historic homes, the cobblestone streets leading down to the river. It was like stepping into another world. We stayed in a charming B&B in a restored Victorian home with a 4-poster bed and clawfoot tub in my room that made me feel like I'd traveled back in time. During the day, we explored the city, visiting museums, popping into little boutiques, eating pralines from a candy shop that had been in business since the 1940s. But my favorite part was the evenings, when we'd walk along the riverfront as the sun set, holding hands like teenagers. No one knew us there. No one cared that I was 60 and Derek was 42. We were just a couple, enjoying each other's company, savoring the moment. On our last night in Savannah, as we strolled along River Street watching the massive cargo ships pass by, Derek stopped suddenly and turned to face me. "Linda," he said, his expression serious, "I want you to know something. I've dated a lot of women in my life, women my age, women older, women younger, but I've never felt the connection I feel with you. You're extraordinary." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me, the insecure part that still heard Richard's voice saying, "You've let yourself go," wanted to deflect, to make a joke, to remind Derek that I was just an ordinary woman pushing retirement age. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger every day, recognized the truth in his words. Not because I was extraordinary in some objective sense, but because what we had together was extraordinary. The ease, the laughter, the respect, the passion. It was something special, something rare, something worth acknowledging. "Thank you," I said simply, reaching up to touch his face. "I feel the same way." He kissed me then, right there on the riverfront, with tourists bustling past and street musicians playing in the background. A perfect moment in an imperfect world. When we returned to Atlanta, something had shifted between us. We'd crossed some invisible threshold from dating to being a couple. Derek started spending more nights at my house in Marietta, though he kept his apartment in the city. We developed little routines together. Saturday morning farmers markets, Sunday brunch at a cafe near his yoga studio, weeknight dinners cooked together in my kitchen. Every Friday, without fail, Derek brings me flowers. Not expensive bouquets from fancy florists, but simple, beautiful arrangements from the farmer's market, or sometimes just wildflowers he's picked on his morning run. Richard forgot our anniversary 15 years running, but Derek remembers the day of the week we met. When we go out together, to restaurants, to movies, to concerts in the park, Derek introduces me as his girlfriend. Not his friend, not his yoga student, but his girlfriend. The first time he did it, I blushed like a schoolgirl. Now, I smile with quiet pride. We go to Whole Foods together, wandering the aisles, discussing recipes and ingredients like we're on some kind of culinary adventure. Derek has introduced me to foods I never would have tried on my own. Quinoa and kale, and something called nutritional yeast that doesn't sound appetizing, but is actually quite good. I've taught him how to make my grandmother's biscuits and my mother's pot roast. On Sunday mornings, we linger in bed, drinking coffee and reading sections of the newspaper to each other. Sometimes we make love, slow and tender in the golden morning light. Sometimes we just talk, sharing thoughts and dreams and memories. Sometimes we're quiet together, which is its own kind of intimacy. It's not perfect. We have disagreements. We come from different generations, different backgrounds, different experiences. Derek doesn't always understand my references to events from the 70s or 80s. I sometimes feel out of place among his younger friends, but we're learning each other, day by day, creating a shared language that belongs just to us. Richard's words still echo in my mind sometimes. "You've let yourself go." But now, when I hear them, I smile. Because it's true, but not in the way he meant it. I have let myself go free from expectations and limitations, from other people's opinions about how I should live my life. Let myself go toward joy, toward passion, toward a future I never imagined possible. At 60, I'm living the romance I dreamed of at 20. The irony isn't lost on me. All those years of stability, security, doing the right thing, and it's only now, in what society considers the twilight of my life, that I'm experiencing the sunrise of real love. I don't know what the future holds for Derek and me. I don't know if this relationship will last a season, a year, or the rest of my life. But I do know that I'm grateful for every moment of it, for every new experience, for every opportunity to feel fully alive. And that, my friends, is a gift beyond measure, at any age. If you're watching this and your husband left you for a younger woman, listen to me. Your life is not over. I'm 60 years old, dating a gorgeous 42-year-old who worships the ground I walk on. Richard? Last I heard, Ashley's complaining about taking care of an old man. Me? I'm having mind-blowing sex 3 times a week. 60 isn't the end, ladies. It might just be your beginning. And trust me, the best chapter of your story might be the one you're about to write. But I want to tell you something even more important than my happy ending with Derek. Something I wish someone had told me 40 years ago when I was starting my life with Richard. Something I hope my daughter Jennifer and all the young women in her generation will learn without having to go through what I went through. Your worth is not determined by the man who stands beside you. It's determined by you, by your choices, your resilience, your capacity for joy and growth. I spent 40 years defining myself as Mrs. Richard Thompson, measuring my success by his success, my happiness by his happiness. I poured myself into creating the perfect home, raising the perfect family, being the perfect corporate wife. And when Richard left, I thought I had lost everything. But what I actually lost was a man who never truly saw me, who never valued my sacrifices or recognized my worth, who could look at 40 years of loyalty and love and toss it aside for someone half his age, someone who wasn't even born when I was nursing our children through midnight fevers and comforting him after stressful days at work. What I gained was myself. At 60, I'm finally the woman I was meant to be all along. Not because of Derek, though he's certainly a delightful bonus, but because I've discovered my own voice, my own desires, my own capacity for joy that isn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I've started taking painting classes at the local community center, something I always wanted to do, but Richard dismissed as a waste of time and money. I'm terrible at it, honestly. My trees look like broccoli, and my people look like stick figures with lumpy potatoes for heads. But I love it. I love the feel of the brush in my hand, the smell of the paints, the way time disappears when I'm focused on capturing light and shadow. I've made new friends, not just Carol and Derek, but a whole community of people who know me as Linda, not as Richard's wife or the kid's mother. People who value me for my thoughts, my humor, my perspective on the world. We meet for book club once a month, discussing novels Richard would have called women's fluff, but that speak to the deepest truths of human experience. I've learned that my body, with all its 60-year-old imperfections, is still a source of pleasure and strength. Yoga has changed how I move through the world. My balance is better, my posture is straighter, and yes, I've discovered muscles I didn't know I had. I'm not trying to look 30 again. That ship has sailed. But I've developed a new appreciation for what this body can do, rather than obsessing over how it looks. I've reconnected with my children, but on new terms. It took time, especially with Jennifer, who had the hardest time accepting Derek. But gradually, as they've seen how happy I am, how much more vibrant and engaged with life, they've come around. Last month, Jennifer invited Derek and me to dinner at her house. A small step, but a meaningful one. Michael still seems uncomfortable when we're all together, but he's making an effort. And David surprised me by telling me he thinks it's cool that I've found someone who makes me happy. "You deserve it, Mom," he said, and I nearly cried on the spot. Even Richard and I have reached a sort of détente. We see each other at family gatherings, graduations, weddings, birthdays. We're polite, even friendly in a distant sort of way. The last time we spoke, at our grandson's 5th birthday party, he actually pulled me aside and said something that shocked me. "You look good, Linda," he said, a strange expression on his face. "Happy?" "I am," I replied simply. He nodded, looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "I'm glad," he said, and I could tell he meant it. That's when I realized I'd forgiven him, somewhere along the way. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of the anger and hurt that had weighed me down for so long. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave him. It was a gift I gave myself. As for Ashley, last I heard through the grapevine, things aren't so rosy in paradise. Turns out taking care of a man in his mid-60s isn't the glamorous life she imagined. Richard's health has been declining. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, the beginnings of arthritis. All the things that happen to a body as it ages, the things I would have helped him navigate with patience and understanding because I was going through them too. But Ashley is 28. She wants to travel, party, build her career. She doesn't want to remember medications or schedule doctor's appointments or deal with a partner who's asleep by 9:30 every night. I don't take pleasure in their struggles. Well, maybe just a tiny bit. But I do see the irony. Richard left me because he thought youth was the answer to his fear of aging, his fear of mortality. But youth can't save any of us from the march of time. And when you're facing the inevitable challenges of aging, you want someone beside you who understands, who doesn't see your aging body as a failure, but as a map of a life well lived. That's what Derek gives me. Not just passion and romance, but understanding and acceptance. He sees the lines around my eyes as evidence of laughter. He sees the silver in my hair as a crown of wisdom earned through experience. He listens to my stories, values my perspective, treats me as a full and equal partner in our relationship. Will it last forever? I don't know. I've lived long enough to understand that nothing in this life comes with guarantees. But I do know this. I will never again make someone else the center of my universe. I will never again surrender my dreams, my desires, my sense of self to maintain a relationship. I will never again believe that I'm too old for adventure, for passion, for new beginnings. Because here's the truth that our youth-obsessed culture doesn't want us to know. Some things get better with age, wisdom, confidence, self-knowledge, the ability to cut through the bullshit and focus on what truly matters. These aren't consolation prizes for getting older. They're the damn jackpot. So if you're sitting there, watching this, feeling invisible because society has decided women over a certain age should fade into the background, I want you to know something. You are not invisible to me. I see you. I value you. I understand the journey you've traveled to get here with all its joys and heartbreaks and moments of breathtaking beauty. Your story isn't over. In fact, the most exciting chapter might be the one you're about to begin. Maybe it includes a new love, like mine does with Derek. Or maybe it's about reconnecting with an old passion, art, music, writing, whatever lights you up from the inside. Maybe it's about traveling to places you've always dreamed of seeing, or starting that business you've been thinking about for years, or simply claiming space in this world that is unapologetically, authentically yours. Whatever it is, I urge you to begin. Today. Now. Because 60 isn't old, it's just getting started. And by the way, Richard's mother was wrong about another thing too. She always told me that a respectable woman would never wear red lipstick after 50. Well, guess what I bought myself last week? The brightest, boldest red lipstick Sephora had to offer. And when I wear it, which is often, I think about all the rules I've followed, all the boxes I've tried to fit myself into, all the ways I dimmed my light to make others comfortable with my glow. No more. At 60, I've earned the right to shine as brightly as I damn well please, and so have you. So here's my message to you. Whether you're 20 or 40 or 80, don't wait. Don't put your dreams on hold for someone else's convenience. Don't buy into the lie that your value decreases with age. Don't settle for less than a life that makes you wake up every morning excited about the day ahead, because life is short, even when it's long. And none of us knows how many chapters we get. Make yours count. Make yours matter. Make yours a story worth telling. That's what I'm trying to do now, every single day. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, but I'm always, always trying. And that, more than the handsome yoga instructor or the red lipstick or the painting classes, is what makes me feel truly alive at 60. The best chapter of your story might be the one you haven't written yet. So pick up the pen, start writing. I can't wait to see what you create.